Workshop meeting of the City Commission and Historic Preservation Board of the City of St. Pete Beach. It is Tuesday, August the 22nd, 2023. It is 4 p.m. Let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. City Clerk, if you'll please do the roll call.
Vice Mayor Grill.
Here.
Commissioner Marone.
Here.
Commissioner Grouse.
Here.
Member Hurley.
Here.
Member Young.
Here.
Member McClitch.
Here.
Chair Lowry.
Here.
Mayor Petrola.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, Chair Lowry, do you want to take it away?
Sure. It's okay if I sit down.
Yes.
Last meeting at the Commissioners, we talked about this agenda report and requesting you all to adopt Resolution 2023.05. It was passed at today's workshop, so I guess you all can get a better idea or understanding for why we are advising or suggesting to the city this would be a good thing to do. So I'm here to answer any questions as far as that goes. I think it's fairly self-explanatory and fairly simple what we're asking for. Ideally, or the genesis of this is there's nothing in the city code that requires the city or staff to notify the historic board on a lot of decisions the city might make. Oftentimes they're brought in because at the discretion they think we might have some information for them, but oftentimes we're not. So this is kind of establishing policy so the staff would be able to know that if certain things come up that that the historic board should be brought into it to give advice to you all before you make a decision. I have examples of that. The things that are on here, the bullet points, have generally or sometimes been done by the city, but they've contacted the preservation board before making a decision or doing action. Sometimes they haven't. So this is just a way to give some guidelines that don't exist. So, you know, any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. We've probably spent 2 or 3 years talking about this stuff, not just to get to this point, but things in general. And this is kind of a first step or a baby step I think that the city should go forward with. So it would give, again, the staff themselves some understanding of what it is that the historic board should be brought in on.
Mr. Mayor, if I can just give a little historical perspective.
Sure.
That some of the folks up here will remember. I was on the Historic Preservation Board as the chair for maybe 8 years, and we kept running into scenarios where we said, hey, this happened, why didn't it come before our board? Oh, yeah, I guess it was supposed to, it just never did. Now, over that period of time, we have had different folks, staff members from the city, working with our board, and then they would leave. And then another person would come in and they'd sit down and say, hey, where'd you guys leave off? Where are you historically on what's happening? Where is it written? Show us where it's written. And we say, well, it's really not written down anywhere. It's just kind of an understanding. And we had this understanding through the years. So we, the board at that time, said, let's get together a list of things that we would like to see. We're not asking for more authority. What we're asking for is an opportunity to review and, if necessary, make recommendations, what we think, to the commission, so when it comes before them, they have an idea of what we thought about it. There's a reason for this board, and these are the things we care about. So we put that list together, and then I came before the commission and presented it. And Commissioners Grouse and Commissioners Grill may remember that Commissioner Pletcher said several times, well, we've already done that. We already do that. That's taken care of. We had a meeting on that. And I said, one of the reasons I'm here is where do we find that? When the new board comes, say we got a brand new board, we've got brand new employees coming in, staff members, where's the book, where's the document that we find it? And it should be in the meeting minutes. So what do we have, 9 years, 10 years, 12 years of meeting minutes that were reviewed?
20.
20?
Yeah, they went back.
So we said, okay, if they're in the meeting minutes, there's no reason for us to recreate the wheel. That kind of was the message I was given was, what are you doing, Marone? Are you really just asking for the same thing that's been done before? So 20 years of review, there's nothing documented. So we know we're not going to be here forever, and the next folks that come in, they'd like to be able to go to that source and says, okay, here's the list of things that the Historic Preservation Board would like to review and make recommendations on, and it's codified to some degree. And the city attorney gave us the legal guidance that it would be best codified in some type of resolution so that there would be an understanding with staff going forward. This comes up, oh, let's bring it to the Historic Preservation Board, because we may be sitting here someday saying, did you guys send it to Historic Preservation? Oh, no, we didn't. And then we have, here's another 30 days. So that kind of was,
Spot on.
right, that kind of brought us to where we are today. And I think, you know, I'll leave it to others to discuss. I'm familiar with the bullet points, and so I'll leave it to others to discuss. But that's kind of the.
Yeah, and I might add to what Commissioner Morona said, you know, that has always been kind of the, you know, word on the street when things happen. It's like, how did that happen? How come we didn't know about that? And it may not be it may be minor things, but unlike the rest of the city, the historic district actually exists and has a specific, you know, goal or objective that the city has approved. We actually exist. So we're, I can give you many examples from when they bricked 8th Avenue. I mean, it's a great thing they did, but nobody went to the historic board and said, what do you think about bricking 8th Avenue? I mean, it was a great idea. Everybody would have said yes, but it just got done. You know, or the jetty down there at the end, which ex-Commissioner Pletcher did ask me to look at, but not as part of being part of the historic board, but because I've lived on Paso Grill for 40 years. She said, here's some proposals. What do you think about this? You know, one of them was, and these cost money. The consultants were hired to go out and say, oh, well, we could build this mega jetty complex, world-class complex, and nobody wants that. I mean, it was just silly. I mean, if they just come to us first, to the people who actually live there, because we have access to those folks that you may not, or at least we can help you all with that. And so, you know, things were done. The parking discs, that was never something that came from the historic board. Maybe it shouldn't have, but the point is that is a historic neighborhood that's very small, very unique, and those things can change the feel of an area. And so the list is endless, basically, about those type of things that happened. For example, that's why on the bullet point you'll see something about street ends. When they redid Paso Grill Way, well, there seemed to be no guidance as to how you dealt with the street ends. And by that I mean between Paso Grill Way east towards the water. You know, so it's just a little. It's owned by the city. Some's paved. Why are some paved? Some are gravel. Why are some gravel? Or, you know, or shell. Some are grass because they basically have always been. And, you know, that was just all done kind of willy-nilly, I guess, by the neighbor saying, would you pave this? And the city saying, okay, or whatever. And so it's inconsistent with the look. It begs the question of, is there special treatment being given to some people, and why this person and why not that person? And so that's something, again, the historic board existed, and it's like, how come we never knew about that? Why weren't we asked to give a idea of a recommendation of what we feel would make sense in that small neighborhood? And so, you know, a lot of these bullet points go to those type of things that have historically been, you know, unique to Paso Grill. You know, the Washingtonia, and it's Washingtonia. It's not, and we have to amend that. It's not Washingtonian. The Washingtonia palms had been there forever. And when they took out Paso Grill Way, they took them down. Now, I don't know if you remember how tall some of those trees are, but some of them grew 100 feet tall. I was reading about them the other day. Some lived to be 500 years old, believe it or not. And so back then, the historic board involved in it was very important to them to make sure that the city replaced them with those same type of palms. And that I wasn't involved in, but that kind of went around and that was ultimately done. And so that's the kind of stuff that we want to make sure gets preserved down there. But there's nothing, as Mr. Marone said, there's no policy that directs the staff to have to do that. And so again, this is kind of a baby step because, you know, there's a lot of things to do down there or to make the historic district. And right now it's just Paso Grill, but soon it's going to be other parts of the city. And we need to get everything in order so we can apply it all throughout the city. You know, I'm just kind of riffing here, but some of you may not know this. You know, in Paso Grill, it's a historic district, but it's not all historic district. There's cutouts that aren't part of the historic district. Okay, even though in 2015 the city spent a lot of money to do a review of that and was recommended to make it all anything south of 32nd historic, but it was never done for some reason. There's the Paso Grill overlay. That doesn't apply to the entire area of Paso Grill. For example, 8th Avenue is not even in the Paso Grill overlay. It took me about a year battling with the city to find that out. Made no sense, but that's the way it is. I can explain that if necessary. It's part of the historic district, but it's not part of the overlay. If you want to build a house down there, you have a choice. You can build it under the overlay or you can build it under the underlying zone. Why? There's so many confusing things. It's just a hodgepodge of changes that have been come over time that we need to get it all figured out and make it consistent, cohesive, and easy for people to understand. I mean, right now you have commercial areas down there that have no stake whatever in the historic district. They could be like just any other place in St. Pete Beach. And you know, someday things are going to change there, and if we really want to, or if we're serious about making a historic district, then we've got to clean those things up. And again, this is just the beginning, I think, as far as that goes. But you know, I look at this, and I would say there are some things we need to change in this, Matthew, a little bit. Just if you all want to read with me the summary of issue.
Can we, before we get into the details of the bullet points and wordsmithing, we have an hour for the meeting, so for discussion purposes. Tell us, Bill, why, Chairman Lowry, excuse me, what's different about the historic board? Because what you just said could be said by any other board of 5 people sitting there. The Beach Stewardship Committee could say the same thing. We don't know everything that's going on for the beaches. They did this, we just got an email. Whether we agree with it or not is a different discussion. Something's on the agenda tonight, never came in front of the Beach Stewardship Committee. Why not? Why aren't we hearing that? So what's different here that you and your colleagues feel we need a resolution, a very, as we discussed last week, a very prescriptive resolution for what should already, in my view, this is just business as usual. This should be being done.
Well, number one, it's not.
Well, okay.
And just like the beach stewardship, should they have been brought in on that? And if they should have, then maybe that's a failure at the city level. That's what we're trying to cure right now. And so, you know, we're designated, especially in the code, Historic Preservation Board with powers and duties and purposes. And that's all we're trying to do is follow what our duty is, essentially.
So then we need a resolution for every board that we have?
I don't know. I'm just here for me.
No, I'm just thinking because this will set a precedent. I mean,
Sounds like it.
but why if we're all friends here, if the city does what you say is not being done,
Right.
why do we need 5 more resolutions? It should be being. I mean, what you're telling me is you want to be brought. Everything you said is great. You want to be brought in the loop. We want to make sure we maintain the historic character. I think, and we'll talk as we get into the bullets, I think we're too prescriptive. And as you mentioned, the other parts of the city are going to be declared historic just by age. We're going to be at 50 years soon. We do have an application in, I know, for the Don Cesar neighborhood. I don't know where we are with that. That's been in for a while. But that'll be historic. So the scope will grow. But do we need to be as prescriptive and have a resolution for, in my view, what should be being done?
Yes.
Why you weren't brought in on the pavers? I wasn't sitting up here. I mean, I don't know. As you know, to your example, is that something? Sure, because the city spent some extra funds to go out and get those bricks, right? The Augusta bricks, right?
I'm talking about actually the sidewalk paver, but yes, the Augusta bricks.
Okay, I'm sorry, I thought you meant the pavers on, I'm sorry. But the street, the same thing. I don't know if you were brought in on that, I would hope so.
Well, we talked about that. That's a perfect example. The city was nice enough, Mike Clark in particular came in and talked to us about, because they need to redo some of the sidewalks. And they brought to us to talk about, because historically there's been hex blocks there, how we should, some advice on how we should go forward. And we kind of, that's part of the resolution here. But that was a situation where the city, on its own discretion, because nothing was telling them they needed to bring it into us. Common sense might, but these people sit in the air conditioning, you know, I mean, and we're down there on, you know, they may not even go visit.
Not Mike, he doesn't sit in the AC.
You know, I don't mean, Mike, what I'm saying is, we're talking about people who live there and see it every day, and people who work for the city and don't necessarily live here. And if someone says, hey, a sidewalk's cracked, they go down and they fill a sidewalk without thinking about putting hex blocks. What do they care? You know, because they aren't part of that. And if no one's at the city, if there's nothing like this that says hex blocks are supposed to be brought under the attention of the historic boards, they can give some advice on it. Because sometimes, just so you know how these hex blocks things work, they're expensive, okay? Some of the old parts of Pascal have the original individual pavers.
Right.
Okay, those are expensive and hard to get a hold of. Okay, so we, as in the resolution, for example, if it's in that old section where they have individual hex blocks, then we'd like to get it replaced with individual hex blocks. In other parts of the city, or of the historic district, they've already created different sidewalks. We aren't asking them to bust them up and change them to hex blocks. All we're saying is in the future, if they're going to lay new sidewalks, they should put the hex blocks grid on it, which makes it look like hex blocks. And everyone seemed to be okay with that, and that certainly makes sense. But there's nothing that would tell any employee, you know, at whatever level, because as we've talked about, the people that make decisions are very rarely the people who actually do the work. And sometimes by the time it gets from up there to down there, it's totally something different. And so,
Excuse me, Mr. Lowry, we're a very small organization. We have 120 employees in the city, more or less.
right.
I mean, we don't have this huge structure. The people making the decisions are sitting here, and you know, I don't know, we use Mr. Berry, who is our planner. I don't know, we have 2 levels between us and him?
Okay, well, let me ask this question back to you. Why weren't we brought in on these things if it's so obvious?
So here's the
I
thing.
can't speak to that. I will tell you how I act. When I'm aware of something, I call my board members, whether, depending on which board it is, if there's an item that I think they should be aware of, when I become aware of it. That's just me. I'm trying to keep it simple, make sure you get what you need, because you're an advisory board, a very important one, as are all the other boards, but I don't want to start being very prescriptive because we feel somebody sitting in an air-conditioned office doesn't bring somebody in on a decision.
What's prescriptive?
Washingtonia trees, hex block sidewalks.
But there's a reason for those.
I understand, but as we talked last week, when Mr. Lowry and I did have a one-on-one meeting, coffee last week, we can, if we decide we're going to do this, I think it should be more generic, talk about the historic district, because we will have more, and not Paso Grill. Paso Grill has a commissioner who sits up here and represents his district, as the rest of us do, representing our districts, and we represent the entire city. So I just don't want to sit here and be prescriptive, because the problem I hear is that people aren't discussing with their advisory boards and getting the input from the advisory boards. That should be very easy to fix.
Well,
No, I do hear what you're saying, because oftentimes by the time it gets to the commission, we get a proposal and a vote, right? At that point, it's too late to say that anyone well, it's not too late, but at that point, we've kind of skipped a step, because at that point, we have to ask, whether it's Brandon or somebody else, did you have a conversation with the historic board? Did you have a conversation with the beach committee and so on? And my understanding what the spirit of what you're asking for is, and maybe there's a way to put both of these together where we have some kind of resolution that, and maybe this is something Matthew can address, at what point, where's the threshold where we say, okay, this project we should be discussed with the beach or the historic board or somebody else, and maybe it can be more simple in the sense that it says, like, whenever we have a project in Paso Grill and it's a city project, that we ask the staff to work with the historic board first before they make any recommendations to the commission.
I think one of the issues that we were having was we have people changing. And when, for example, I remember Brandon, I think it was you and me and Wesley sat down, because Wesley said, hey, Chris, I don't have any records for 5 years of what happened in front of this board. Chelsea Weldon's gone, Jennifer Briles is gone. I don't know what, I can go back and look at the minutes, but I don't, you're gonna sit down and give me a little bit of a history lesson here. Well, then I leave, and who carries that history lesson on? I mean, is it gonna be transferred down by folklore, or is at some point in time are we gonna have it memorialized in this is separate and apart from the document that we're looking at now. It can be, obviously, changes can be made to it, but just the spirit of I think what they're asking, the spirit is that something is documented to let those that go after us know where to find it and what to do. And because these folks may not be on the board someday, I may not be up here someday, but the perfect example was me coming before this commission and being told, essentially, Marone, I don't know what you're doing here. We do all this stuff. Well, where is it written down that we do all this stuff? Because we need to tell X, Y, and Z who's handling this to get it before us. How would Brandon know? I mean, he just wouldn't know, and he shouldn't be expected to know if there's nothing that's documented. So a city of this size, I think, should have some documentation to give staff guidance. Now, how detailed that guidance should be, how detailed the bullet points should be, I guess we can collectively decide. That's kind of to me, that's kind of a workshop thing. The spirit of it, it seems to make a lot of sense that we just have something memorialized so those in the future can find it. What it looks like, I guess we can workshop it.
Well, we just spent, on the minutes, I think the problem has been identified and resolved. I think we have spent a lot of money and invest in time and effort to make sure we have proper minutes, they're categorized, they're digitized, and that all that effort's been led by our city clerk over the last couple of years, 2 years, and you're still not done. Right, but so I think any historical information that was missing, and it's a shame, I mean, I just say shame on us that we don't have, certain years seem to be gaps. So I think going forward, just in general, not just for the historic board, but for all the boards and everything we do as a city, it's there, retrievable, indexed, et cetera. I believe I'm correct, yes? Okay.
Is the, Chairman, is the reason for having it this prescriptive, is that so that we can establish a guideline for the future, so that we have a consistent way that we're implement, so that we maintain the character, and then going forward we have, guidelines for how to implement any work that's done in the future, so that that historic character is preserved going forward?
Well, that's a good question, and I kind of answered it in two parts. Clearly, this resolution is designed for what is currently the historic district, okay? Like Washingtonian trees we talked about. Bella Vista may not have Washingtonia trees, and maybe they've got a different kind of tree that is more unique to Bella Vista, and we might want to make sure that the right-of-ways get planted with those type of trees when and if Bella Vista or parts of it become historic. One of the main distinctions between what's going to happen in the future here is you're going to get homes that are going to get historic designations. You're not going to get entire neighborhoods, at least not for a while. Pascagoula has been around 100 years. It has been its own unique district 50 years before they started building houses north of the Don Cesar. So it is extremely unique. And so at the moment, this resolution, this does apply to what's currently Pascagoula, because that is the historic district as it sits right now. I mean, we can use wordsmith if you want to say, and change that to existing historic district. I don't know, but and when things change later, none of these bullet points, they talk about alleyways, streets, trees. The only thing that, stop signs, the only thing that really gets into structures, okay, is that one bullet point that, that the way it is right now, the way that the code is set up right, the city doesn't have to tell us anything about any home being built on Paso Grill. As a matter of discretion, they choose to let us know about houses being built under the Paso Grill overlay, but there's nothing that says they have to tell us that. Okay, but they do. That's nice that they do. Houses built under the underlying district, they don't have to tell us anything. And lately they have, because we started saying, hey, we should know about these things even if we can't do anything about them. We like to know what's going on in the neighborhood. And to make a huge example, you know, back when they're talking about building the Holloway Hotel over a half block on 8th Avenue, the city's position is we don't have to tell you anything. The 8th Avenue is not in the overlay. So we don't, as long as everything's fine, that, you know, they don't have to ask for any variances, they can do that, you don't have a say-so. And to me, and I hope to everybody else, that's just wrong that that exists like that. And that's down the line. That's not this resolution necessarily. It does speak to that we'd like at these steps to have the city let us know what's being built down there. That didn't even, so this is a board with no teeth. The only thing we can do is give you all advice. And we can't give you advice if we don't know what the city's doing.
And there's no different from any other board that we have. They say the exact same thing.
I can only speak for myself.
I know, but I have the perspective of all the boards, and I'm telling you, what you just said is generic for all the boards. If these are advisory boards. These were set up in the city charter as advisory boards. If you think we need to change the charter, then we'll go off and change it if you want to have teeth.
But here's the difference. We're supposed to give advice about things in the historic.
I got it, and I understand your
There's
point.
nothing that tells the city how to do that.
So let's get whoever we can, you know, I would suggest then the 5 commissioners send an email to city staff saying that they need to make sure that they're engaging with the advisory, all the advisory boards on items that are affecting those boards, whether it's beach, whether it's parks, whether it's historic.
Yes, but this,
I mean, because we're very specific here, hex blocks. Hex blocks is really not a conceptual thing. This, now you're being very prescriptive to tell Public Works, thou shalt use hex blocks. We can, again, I think we can word this to find a win-win, but we need a resolution then for every board.
Commissioner Girl, if I may,
Please.
I feel as though consistency is key. So perhaps this is a launching off point, or perhaps this is the awakening of saying that we need to have consistency across the boards. And it is a kind of an insurance policy, if you will. So down the road, when none of us are sitting here, someone can go back and say, okay, this is the way that it was for the beach stewardship. This is the way that it was for the recreation board. This is the way that it was. And at least it's a launching off point at that given time. I'd also like to encourage you, and perhaps you've already done it, each of you, other cities, beach communities that are historic throughout our state. We're plentiful in our state. The guidelines and the procedures that they've set forth in areas such as St. Augustine, Apalachicola, Boca Grande, we are inferior in comparison. This would, and I'm not saying that we're the same, because certainly St. Augustine's the oldest city in the country, but I think we have work to do, and I feel like this is the start of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think what they're doing is exactly what they're supposed to be doing, which is, here's our advice. This is what we're advising as this committee. And they're not asking for permission to be involved in every project. What they're asking for is at least bring us in for the consultation on the front end so that we're aware of these projects and so that they can do what they're there for, which is to provide advice in all of these situations, whether it needs to be this descriptive. Again, I think I understand the spirit of why it's so descriptive, so that we have something going forward. And again, we can always change it in the future if a future historic board decides to bring a recommendation that we make changes to, whether it's the trees or the driveways or so on. But if nothing else, I commend you at least for taking the initiative, and if the other boards aren't, maybe that's a conversation we need to have with the other boards and say, look, maybe you need to be more proactive and ask to be involved more. Because again, you all live down there. You see this every day, you know. Mr. Lowry's been there for a very long time, you know, and so we do rely on your advice and on what you're bringing to us and your recommendations. So I do appreciate that.
And again, you know,
Yeah.
I communicate with these folks. They call me and say, but what happens, and I think what someone already said here, so I'll say it quick, is they don't know what's happening. It comes before the commission, and we're supposed to vote on it. And then I would have to say, did it go before the Historic Preservation Board? Well, I didn't know we were supposed to have them look at it. We can't vote on it tonight. Folks have been waiting for a vote on it. We can't vote on it tonight. We're going to have to kick it back.
And you remember that's happened. I called
It
you,
has,
for
yeah,
example, on the lights,
yeah.
when we were replacing the lights, when you were in your old role. I called you the night before the
Yeah.
meeting and said, you okay with these new lights? The one.
But these guys like to talk about it too, and they can't talk amongst themselves because of sunshine unless they're in a meeting, which they meet once a month. So if it comes before them first, then we're not putting things, because it always seems like we're putting things off to the next meeting and the next meeting and the next meeting. People have permit applications, they're waiting, they get their hearing, there's not a quorum, you know, all these things. So if it can come before them first, then it gets to us, it's clean. It's a clean, you know, and they've seen it, they're calling me when they get it. They get it, then they're calling me. Chris, this is what we think. This is what we think. This is what we've decided. And then we have that in our back pocket. And again, I think if you look at the language of a lot of the bullet points, review, advise, make recommendations, none of them are the power capturing, authority capturing bullet points, but merely wanting to be part of the process.
Yeah, and putting it in the form of a resolution just carries more weight than just all of us sending an email to Brandon and say, going forward, please do this. Because one day none of us will be here, and then for the next people that will be here, at least we'll be having something on the record and not having to scour through 20 years of minutes.
Yeah, and if I may, Mayor, because I've worked with the board for quite some time now, so they could propose ordinance changes as well, right? They could propose more powers and duties, because the whole point of the Historic Preservation Board is to maintain the character of not only historic structures, but the historic district. Right, so we went back and forth on that, and as Commissioner Marone points out, this is more of, the problem is even if it gets to you, how are we all supposed to know that the HPB is supposed to review it? We don't, right? Now if it's in the code of ordinances, then we always make sure that those ordinances are abided by, and if it does need to go pursuant to ordinance, then we do that. But these are more things that, as a board, they agreed on that they would like to see to maintain the character of the historic district without that threshold question of actually amending the code of ordinances.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just, I think, and this has all been, a lot of these things have been over time in the last few years where we've developed, you know, like the sidewalks or the trees or things of that nature. But, you know, like the street ends, it really wasn't an issue until they actually came in and started doing anything. They were the same for years and years and years. And then when they, you know, dug up past Squirrel Way, things changed. And so I'm not always sure that the city and all that they do, and I'm not criticizing by any means, all that they do, all the different projects they have that within themselves they say, hey, this is something that's in the historic district that has to be treated differently. You know, right now, and I'm sure y'all know about it to some degree, they're starting to work on some of the alleys down there. Well, it's already going to cause problems. In the historic board, for example, Mike Clark's talked to us. He talked about, you know, the experimental one they put in there between 21st and 22nd that worked so well, and we all agreed, yes, that seems to be the wave of the future, and he explained how these things done. But not in detail particularly, okay? And so now they're starting to go to other parts of the historic district. And I don't know if there's a schedule. If there is, you know, that's the only thing the historic board knows is we had that conversation with Mike. Well, you know, the guys down there, the subcontractors down there working, they apparently have been told 15 feet wide alleys. So they're starting to cut down people's trees and stuff, all right? And wait a minute, you know, then Mike comes down, everything gets kind of resolved. I mean, not knowing what the schedule is, and it may just be when someone's available, we'll start doing something. Every one of those blocks down there has to be treated differently on those alleys. Some have been neglected, some are in great shape and don't really need anything done to them, some are constantly in puddles. That's the kind of stuff the historic board should be able to work with the city, or at least with Mike, and say, hey, this block here, we've talked to the residents, they don't really have a problem with what they have, you know. They don't have a flooding issue, so you really don't have to change it unless the city says we're supposed to, you know. Or this alley takes a turn in the middle of it. We're gonna figure out how we're gonna have to do that. Because, well, there's a lot of issues out there besides just people's property being affected. And so that's something that's currently happening, and there's really been no input, but I think there should be in the future. I don't know what the schedule is, whether it's going to be another year before they start on another alley, I don't know. But that's something we should be knowing, and we should know in advance so we can deal with that. So, you know, I just throw that out as being a situation where currently, even though the city is much, much, much more receptive than they were 3, 4, 5 years ago about bringing us in on things before things happen, it still happens. So this, I think, helps give some guidance to everyone.
Should we discuss the individual points?
Yeah.
I think the 8th bullet is the crux of the whole thing.
Which one is that? Because they're not numbered.
I counted, sorry. It's on the first one on the second page.
Okay.
And we can remove the word major, and I think that's the spirit of what we're trying to achieve without being overly prescriptive.
You say remove major?
Correct.
So it'd be any improvement?
I think,
That's actually more.
I mean, that's certainly fine, but I think we were concerned when we came up with some of this stuff that the city was like, well, anytime historic house wants to change their, add an air conditioner or redo the inside of their house, is that something that you all need to know about? And it's like, well, no, but we have to have some sort of guidelines so we know when things are actually happening. The other day we had somebody come in because they want to put an awning over their front door, which is great. I'm glad it came through that way, but to me that's a fairly minimal threshold.
Yeah, if we're better to leave the word major in, I'm okay. It's just,
Well, I think that was...
what's major and minor, it's like beauty, it's in the eye of the beholder. I mean, you start getting...
It defines itself further when it says any improvements that would materially alter the character and design. So I think whether if you take major out, it still is not giving us carte blanche to look at everything, but that would materially alter.
Yeah, and it really
Because I think
just
that's the
says-
crux of what you're looking for.
It is. It's a catch-all, really, because we put these other things in just because we knew those were things that were unique to the existing historic district that had been problems in the past and could be problems in the future, so we wanted to, be specific about those things.
Major is certainly open to someone's interpretation.
I think if you
Well,
remove it,
I think that was the discussion when we were going over this about the material, to address that, if I remember
Correct,
correctly.
because we were trying to avoid roads, right? I mean, there's certain things that the city's just going to do citywide in the historic district that don't really alter the character of the district itself.
Yeah, if you want to think the
But
word...
once again, I mean,
Right,
we drafted this, but I mean, you put 4 people in a room and everyone will come up with a different conclusion on what that means.
I mean, we're already having problems on Pastoral Way with the pipes breaking and things of that nature where they got to come and dig up the roads. I mean, that just happens in any kind of city, but that's not something that I think would have to be brought in front of us, and a question of something of that nature. And that's why I think we chose the word, or the word major was used to kind of delineate that from, day-to-day maintenance issues.
Well, would this clause be more palatable if we included aesthetics? Anything, we're concerned with aesthetics, not necessarily the insides or the inner workings. So would that clarify that and minimize some concern about being overreaching?
no, I mean, you already have design. I mean, design aesthetics to me are interchangeable. And, for me, the operating principle here is review and make recommendations, right? You're not asking for additional powers. You're not asking for a veto. You're not asking for anything else other than to say, when something is done by the city in the historic district, can we please have an additional step that is on the record that needs to be taken, that we consult with the board? You meet once a month, so there should never be a huge delay in that. So overall, I generally don't have an issue with any of these things. The only thing is the trees, are those native trees?
That's an interesting question. Yes, they've been native for like well over 150 years, but they're originally from Mexico. They've taken over, I mean, they brought them over so long ago that they're native now.
They're historic, at least.
Yeah, I mean, they're not like, it's not like a medjool or something which costs a lot of money and really isn't particularly native. These are trees that grow all over Florida now, but initially came out of Mexico however many 100 years ago or whatever when they started settling Florida in certain areas.
And I think having it prescriptive like this also gives the next board and any future boards at least something that they have as a yardstick that they can measure anything that comes before them for review.
And on the trees, it talks about whenever possible and financially feasible. It's not I mean, there's going to be times when you can't get a hold of them or there's some reason you don't want a tree that's going to grow that high or whatever. So I just think it's just a guideline, really, if anything, and that's, and I assume most of y'all were here before they tore the trees up. And it used to be when you turned left at the Don or went straight through the Don, you'd just see this row of these super, super high trees. And it was a great look that 20 years from now we'll probably have again, but and that was something that people, tourists and stuff always talked about, the trees and stuff. And, there's still a lot of the originals around off side streets and stuff, and they're, iconic, I guess. So I think that's an important part. But I also said it, like we say, it's not prescriptive. That's the only tree that can be planted there. It's just we would like that if possible.
And it'll still come to the commission for vote and discussion. And if we find out that for whatever reason 20 years from now the blocks end up costing 100 times more than what they can cost now.
I think that's a key phrase, when financially feasible.
Yeah.
Need to have that.
Practical, feasible, yeah.
And that clause can be put into the summary of issues, for that matter. Put it up there. I mean, I think we all agree with that. I don't think that the cost of shells are ever going to get too high that can't have a shell alleyway. But yes, I agree. Those hex blocks are archaic, and I don't even know if they're made anymore. I mean, we're constantly trying to find people who've got them stashed in their backyards.
Yeah, maybe that point one, whatever possibly financially feasible, might be included in the summary at the end or in the beginning.
Whenever possibly feasible, these items should be taken into account, something.
Yeah.
So just switch the sentence. Start off with whenever possible and financially feasible.
In the first paragraph.
For everything.
So that it covers all the points, not just point one.
For everything, yeah. It's the catch-all.
Got it.
Yeah. I'm not jump ahead because we're kind of going down here. I mentioned that thing about the alleys, and I was going to bring that up at our next meeting, Matthew, or Jennifer, maybe we can get that as a discussion on that about the alleys. Because, like I said, I think we'd like to be able to have a little idea of the schedule and what are the guidelines they have for these, certain height or widths of the alleys. Anyway, but the street elements, end elements, not only on Passer Girl Way, where a lot of people, I think that that's part of the private property of the people who live there, when it's not. And you hear stories of fishermen being told to leave and that kind of thing. But on the beach side, it applies too, because there's some folks down there that think that those beach ends are theirs, and they tell people they can't. They're trespassing and things of that nature. And so as those are sore spots, it can be, and I think it's nice if we know, or the city knows, when we're dealing with those issues, that it's the whole district that has a say-so, and not just the property owner that lives next to it.
I think what we maybe as a separate item need to do for those street ends is similar to what was done in District 1 going up Ocasiega. We have all these street ends that have been turned into mini parks or small parks or
Yeah, pocket parks.
pocket parks.
Yeah.
Just, they nothing fancy, they just got some shells, they have a tree, a bench or two, and you can sit there and look at the water.
And that's been, some are kind of like that down there now, but some are really just being used as parking lots for the houses
know, yeah.
there. And some on the beach side are so overgrown, they don't look like the city even maintains them, which I don't care if they do or don't. I mean, I'm just saying, but at some point, there may be some reason we need to get in there, or the city does, and therefore, yeah, it's something that should go through the board, or at least for advice.
So the other question I have is, in paragraph 1, it says to be implemented within the Paso Grill overlay district.
Yes.
So, for example, in your statement that 8th Avenue, for example, is not included in the overlay, so
That should be, I agree, I already said it scratched out. I mean, I think that should say within the historic district, or the existing historic district, however you want to do that, because right now, as I said, there's some properties that aren't in the historic district or the Paso Grill overlay that are.
So when, again, I don't know where we are with the Don Cesar application.
Well, Don's not in the historic district. Wait, okay, I'm
Well,
following, yes.
We have the application, so I'm just thinking ahead without having to go change the resolution. That's why I was saying, make it more general, talking about anything that's deemed historic. I don't know what we'll let Matthew tell us what the right wording is. Because I'm assuming if we have another area of the city that's deemed officially historic, the board is going to want to have oversight, and should have oversight, actually, and be advising and recommending on that additional area. That's what I'm saying. Again, I find it prescriptive to Paso Grill. We will have more historic districts, and if we'll just say, well, we'll deal with it when and as other areas come in, that's fine too. It's just.
Well, I do think, because you're right, that's likely coming up relatively soon. I mean, it's in the works that could occur, but I would point out, because it's like, I don't think they even have alleys in the Don Cesar Basin area there.
but if we change this to specify, I think what Commissioner Grill is saying is like if another neighborhood comes under the historic designation, then these would apply. Yeah, so, but if we specify that this is for the Paso Grill Historic District.
We can. I just because something becomes 50 years old doesn't automatically create its own neighborhood district.
Can we do that?
Right? Like, you would have to actually go through a public hearing process to expand or create another historic district in the city.
Can we say that it's the historic district and this resolution shall apply to all of those properties that are designated historic in the future and are would be governed by the Historic Preservation Board, something like that?
Well,
We can. I just don't think, and I won't speak for the board, but I don't think that was the intent of what they were saying. Because, for example, Beach Theater, historic structure, we have other historic structures. This was more for the current district on
Correct.
how they wanted it to look.
I would just say what Commissioner Grill said, because just to go, the Maritana Basin or the Don Cesar Place, that does have a lot of old homes, et cetera, and that potentially could be a district. My only point was, I don't think it has shell alleyways, doesn't have hex blocks, so there's things that just wouldn't apply anyway that are in here. So if we just said in the summary of issues within the historic district and change that from Paso Grill overlay, because Paso Grill overlay is too prescriptive, because it should be the whole historic district.
Right. I mean, because I think that's, again, what you're looking for.
You can actually attach the, as defined by, and whatever our map is.
The map,
Yeah, and we attach a map as Exhibit A,
Attach the map.
so it captures all of the geographical area that's at issue.
Okay, so is there a consensus to change Paso Grill overlay district to historic district?
Any historic district.
I
Well,
think that,
we only have one.
I
so.
know, but then that.
yeah, but I think my point
Like I
was,
said, like if it's so involved to create another one Yeah, that there will be there will be much more than resolutions at that point, and we can always amend it if we need to.
No, I don't think,
Historic districts, then, just.
we can
I don't think having Passive Grill overlay is a problem, because the items in here are specific to that overlay,
Well,
right? They may not apply in a different historic district if one is created in the future, so I don't have a problem with leaving it as Passive Grill overlay. My question was simply, what happens if the city has to do a project on 8th Avenue?
that's the problem, Mayor, is that.
So maybe we need to address that in the next workshop where we look at what we do with the overlay
Yes.
based on your
You
recommendation.
can say including the CRDEA district.
Well, I think you just,
I could just say Passive Grove Historic District.
Could you not
And
attach a
not say
street
the word
to it?
overlay.
Because we're looking at the
Yeah.
overlay and changes
It
in
really is
that.
just, it is the historic district. I guess the question is, if we get more historic districts down the line. That's why I said existing historic district.
And
Or
I
if you
just-
said Passive Grill Historic District, that does the same thing.
That's why I was saying that bullet 8 is it was all encompassing, and we don't get into, is it overlay, not overlay? Right.
Get away from the overlay, because that's.
Okay.
Or that any historical district within the city.
Yeah, I just think we just say historic district, and then if there's going to be a subsequent historic district, again, Matthew said
It's
we're going to
very
go through a long, involved process before that would even be recognized.
Or
And then
even
We
expanding
can probably
the
deal
current
with
map.
the resolution at that time and expand the resolution,
Would take
amend
time.
it.
Because ideally, what you would do first, in my opinion, based on what the board and I have discussed, is expand the current district to include areas that are not currently included before developing a brand-new historic district. Right, so like 8th Avenue, certain areas south of 32nd are not even in the district, and I think that would probably be the most logical first place, would be to expand the current district prior to developing a new one.
But we do have an application submitted. Didn't Lynn Rossetti, didn't we spend a whole bunch of money, and then Lynn,
50,000 actually is coming to the next commission meeting for us to accept the grant and then put it out for bid.
but she's applied.
Yeah, and we got it, we
We got the
received
grant.
it.
Oh.
And
I
then
have to
she
review.
just applied again for the next cycle for the Corey Avenue district survey work.
Okay, so it is, I mean,
Currently.
I know it's in hopper.
And then once we get that survey back, then we have a discussion on, okay, is it time to expand the designation of the historic district? Because you have to have public hearings and certified mail notices and all sorts of things. But you need the survey first.
okay. So for the next meeting.
Yeah. Wishful
I
thinking.
would, just as a suggestion, back in 2015, which the city has many copies of, they did, as I said, they did a big, very involved analysis of Passive Grill and the historic district and where it was at that point. And if you gentlemen have not read that, it's interesting reading and will come up and be important in the in the fairly near future.
Can we ask for one other recommendation, which is that the next time, because it seems like you have other projects in the works, whether it's the overlay, whether it's expanding the Passive Grill Historic District, can we just make sure that we schedule a workshop with the commission so that we don't receive it just at a commission meeting? I think that's much more productive if we can sit here.
Absolutely. I can't tell you how I told Commissioner Grill I was very pleased when he asked to move it on, because I knew I'd be here till 11 o'clock. But no, but it makes sense. And if you're all willing to do that, I mean, that's great. Yes. And that's just something we need to do at the meetings, is make sure that that happens.
Okay.
All right, any other discussion?
I have one comment, question. So one thing that I'm hearing is part of the issue is this information isn't codified anywhere so that staff knows, right? And another comment is, who wants to really search through all the minutes and bullet all of that, right? Okay, so once we adopt this resolution, how do we make sure that that isn't the case, right? Meaning, what happens? Where does this go? I have my own thoughts on that, but I asked that because in 2004 there was a resolution adopted for the Historic Preservation Board that had some policies and procedures not like this. It was before you were renamed. This board was renamed to Historic Preservation Board. I didn't know that that resolution existed when I became your city clerk. My deputy city clerk didn't know that resolution existed until Lynn brought it to Jenny and I. And it relates to some things in regard to attendance that is not mentioned in the city's code as it relates to Historic Preservation Board, but it exists, and we abide by that. So we adopt this. Does this become a 2004 resolution?
Right, how does it get out there?
I mean, I have my own thoughts, but what I want to hear what staff's thoughts are on how we're going to make sure that this doesn't become a 2004 resolution, because you can't just count on Ginny and I. Mike Clark isn't going to, or a future public works director, or a future city manager, or future Jennifer. I mean, what? So can somebody help me understand? I have my own theory and my own thoughts on what I'd like to do, but I just want to hear what your thoughts are and your plan was as staff.
What is your recommendation?
Well, Matthew, what was your thought?
On how, I mean, my thought was this is way better than what's happened in the past. It's a step in the right direction. I mean, because the 2004 one, no one knew about it, but we could at least find it and refer to it, and now we have. But realistically, I'm not aware. I mean, is there like a folder for the board? I mean, I don't know if there's a shared drive. I don't know internally if there's something in.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the answer to that, but I can tell you what I used to do in the city I came from. We had policies and procedures like this, and we actually codified in Muni Code as a resolution, not as an ordinance, and it's housed online on the Muni Code website. And it's like a different, you'll see it's like a hyperlink, and you click on that and it pulls up the resolution. So it's not going to be specifically articulated like the ordinances show, but it will be a hyperlink that pulls that up. And so that was my thought process. But I just kind of wanted to know what was the intent after we adopted this, like where does it go?
Yeah, it
so
can
that
be
staff
distributed
can
to the
find
department
it.
heads.
Well, I think
know?
there'll be an email that goes out, which is what I said an hour ago. We send out an email telling everybody, thou shalt talk to the,
Yeah, but then like, and then
but
what?
then we need to codify
Right,
it,
but like
obviously.
then what? When Brandon's gone, then what?
Right, where do we find
Where's
it?
that email go?
Never going.
You know, do you put it on your bulletin board? Like I don't
No,
know.
it needs to be it needs, because I will say that I was looking today for other purposes at boards and the ordinance for the various boards and membership and meeting attendance for a completely different reason. And I found that the wording for the Historic Preservation Board is completely different than in every other board. For example, every other board says if you miss 3 meetings consecutively, you're off the board. Doesn't say that, at least in the ordinances.
That's right.
We're very
For- No, but again, I'm looking just, you know what I mean, I'm looking for consistency and you know, across the board, because I think all the boards fundamentally should be giving us advice and counsel on all the subjects. That's why they exist.
Yeah, I mean, I'm
So
just
we don't
hearing there's
have,
a problem, right? And a problem is with these things, but the overarching problem here is how do we make sure consistently staff knows,
Right.
So
right?
my
And so
my
I
suggestion,
just wasn't hearing that.
and I appreciate that, Amber, because I do think it's important, or else all of this is for nothing.
moot, right.
But there was a time period that I've heard of from prior board members where newly appointed board members would get a binder of things from Historic Preservation Board. And this should go across all boards, generally speaking, right? With a copy of all resolutions passed, copy of historical surveys, whatever's relevant to the board, that's what that new board member should get. And I see this as part of that binder.
Do we have an example of one of those?
Yeah, like this.
Yes.
But I don't think that resolution, I don't think the resolution was in there.
2004, probably not.
It wasn't.
I mean, Jenny sits and we have her prepared, a elected official handbook, but we have a smaller version of that, and she sits there and she educates board members specifically to their board, right? But we don't know all of historic. That's more of a different section of staff that needs to take that time to meet with the board members if that's what the intent is.
You have something that where you click on Historic Preservation Board, and the first thing that comes up in a row of PDFs is the ordinance that governs the Historic Preservation Board, followed by resolutions, followed by minutes of board meetings for each year. things like that, and then you just, somebody can click on.
I mean, it would be, it would be a smart idea to have a SOP for each board, right?
Absolutely, because I say, that's something for each board. We
I
put
mean, but
somebody,
I have SOPs for the clerk's office related to the clerk's function. I don't know the answer for the ancillary boards where what the board liaisons have. I can't answer that question. But what I'm hearing sounds like an SOP along the lines, or incorporated with that is the binder type of situation, which Jenny does handle in a different capacity. I can ask her to add a few things to that. But I think to solve this problem, it needs to be adopted in that online Muni code where all staff members have access to the Code of Ordinances and should know how to look up Code of Ordinances.
agreed.
So right now, we don't have a database of resolutions.
The database of resolutions is located in my digital filing cabinet, Laserfish, and some people have access to it. Brandon is very well versed. He's taken the time to understand it and utilize it appropriately, so he is very efficient and understands that, and does work with that. I don't know the answer to other staff members. That's something else that I need to talk to you guys about on a different level. But as resolutions is an online Laserfish database for internal, all staff can have
But
access.
not like with the ordinances where anyone in the public can go and they can click
We
on
have a
ordinances, you
rolling,
can-
on our website, we have a rolling 10 years or 5 years, yes. But the way they're outlined on the website, they don't say like the title of it. You can look at the index and then from there find it.
Yeah, because they're out there. You can search, but there's no description. They're just by number.
No, but if you look it up on the index, you can.
Unless
Yes,
you're
it's
Brandon
online.
and you have them all memorized by number.
Okay,
Brandon,
so,
what's 2012-08?
so are you looking for agreement that we need to memorialize this
Yeah,
in Muni code?
I do, and I just wanted to bring that awareness so that if I'm not here, you all know that it can be codified, because it doesn't sound like anyone really knew that. And so I just wanted to make that on the record, and you all know that that's
Yes.
something you can ask for is codification, and it doesn't need to be an ordinance, it could be a resolution and tied to, you can even do some policies and directives incorporated into Muni code. Muni code has the ability to do a lot of things. It's not laid out, exactly like ordinances, there's a specific format for that, but Muni code is a useful tool, and we can use it in that fashion. So that's the point of the conversation, I just wanted to have that dialogue.
Yeah, I think
I
it's-
do like additionally what Commissioner Maroon recommended was having it on our board page where you can see it with our mission statement and our resolution and our bios, and
Yeah.
I think that would be a great place for us as a board and staff and the public to be able to see these items.
This might be a template that we can use for the rest of the boards.
Oh, absolutely. It's-
As we start sensing, and from time to time, frustration with the other boards or not. They'd like to be involved in certain things, and we want to be able to access what they've decided in the past.
No, I think it's good for all the boards, right, from the get-go. You have a new person, okay, you're on the ABC board. Okay, what do I do?
Correct.
Jenny does sit with them.
Yeah, but-
I don't want anyone, the members of the public, to think you're just like, hey, I'm here,
No, but then they can go, they know, okay, here's my section for the board that I'm joining. Here's all the relevant things, so when they're at home with their adult beverage, watching a movie, and they could be clicking and reading.
Well, and I think first and foremost, we have to add this to an agenda for approval.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
No, it was a good discussion.
That's good. Any further discussion?
Other thing I would say, just to be a stickler here, the actual type of tree is a Washingtonian, no N on the end of it, just to be, not sound like I'm being ridiculous.
Yeah, you reviewed it too, so.
Well, I didn't pay attention. So,
It's not George's tree.
and then the change we had about historic.
So just to be clear, are we saying Paso Grow Historic District?
We are eliminating the word overlay.
Correct.
Except for in the bullet point 6 or 1, 2.
Yeah, we'll leave it in the bullet, but
It stays the same there, right?
We can bring it to our meeting next week. Not a lot
we have
changed.
HPB. Okay.
Is it next week? 2 weeks? 2 weeks, sorry.
Slow it
Well, I
down.
think we're good. I mean, we're adding
Down.
whenever possible and feasible in
I need
in
those
section
days.
2, and then Paso Grow Historic District. and then Washingtonia. Good.
When financially,
And if I may add, which this could be irrelevant, but the A in Passive Grille should be capitalized.
Thank you.
It's my type A. Pun intended.
If it's going to be part of Municode, I'd prefer
You're a
it be
capitalist.
So, thank you. Historic.
Big A, little e.
All right. Well, if there is nothing else, speak now or forever hold your peace. This meeting is adjourned.